right. Well, today we are wrapping up a series called Doubt. We're at the very end of our series. Next week, we're actually starting a Christmas-themed series. We're calling it Reclaiming Wonderful. But for today, we're wrapping up doubt. Now, if you haven't been with us for the past few weeks, to bring you up to speed real quick, in case it feels like you're coming in at the end of the movie, the question that we've been wrestling with really is, what do we do? What do we do with doubt, right? Like, doubt, we defined as the feeling of uncertainty, like the feeling of being, I don't know, I'm not sure, maybe not. It's instability. It can feel a little shaky, right? And in certain contexts, it's good. Doubt is good. If you get some guy who wants to take your daughter out on a date and you're not sure about his intentions, right? Like, doubt, that's a good thing. If you got to rescue a princess and involves you crossing a rope bridge that's like really shaky over a, steep canyon, it's good to have doubt in situations like that. But when it comes to church or God or religion or Jesus or Christianity, doubt often brings another feeling with it, right? It often will make us feel guilty, right? Like you feel like, I really shouldn't be questioning. I'm just supposed to believe. I just gotta believe, right? Or we might feel shame, like I'm never gonna believe the way I should or the way my friend does or that lady does, or it can even bring frustration. Like, why isn't this clicking for me yet? Doubt gets kind of hairy and complicated in the church world, and it looks all different shapes and sizes. Like, you can doubt the whole thing. Like, maybe you're sitting here today right now just thinking, I can't wait till this is over. I don't believe any of this. You just doubt the whole entire operation from start to finish. And I get that. I've been there, right? Or maybe it's just like a little bit of doubt. Like, you doubt just like one part of it. Or it's one part you doubt that affects other parts. And so we're like, all right, well, what do we do? What do we do with doubt? And over the past few weeks, the goal has been to give you some tools for your tool belt when doubt does come, because it will come, and we need to know how to handle it. The first week, what we said is as the foundation for doubt, what you have to know is that it's okay to doubt. Everybody doubts. We said you could be aware of your doubts, recognize them, don't suppress them, but don't be ashamed of them. And we looked at a story with Jesus and a guy named John the Baptist, who was like, this super mega spiritual religious rock star that everybody looked to. He had this huge following. And at the end of his life, not the beginning, at the end of all this, he's like, I'm not even sure if Jesus is who he says he is. And instead of dropping the hammer on him, like, how dare you, John the Baptist, doubt Jesus, Jesus shows compassion. He's not critical. In fact, he turns to the crowd and brags about John while John's going through a season of doubt. He talks good about him behind his back. And so it's this feeling, this assurance that you will have doubts, and that's okay. The worst thing you can do is beat yourself up because you're wrestling with some uncertainty. The next week we said, okay, as long as you're not ashamed of them and you're aware of them, well, then engage them. Don't ignore them. We looked at a group of people that are commended for listening to the person up front and being critical and not taking his word for it and going home and seeing if what he said was true. These people are actually commended for being skeptical, engaging, and that led them to belief. So we said, even here, I don't want you to take my word for it. You hear me say something, you're like, I don't know about that. You should go home and engage that. Investigate it. Don't take my word for it. Then the next week, Tom was up here and he talked about a guy named Tom. Those are the only people he's allowed to talk about, men named Tom. Just kidding. Doubting Thomas, which is an unfortunate name. The poor guy had one rough day, and now forever he's known as Doubting Thomas. But he was the guy who, after Jesus died and came back, he was like, unless I can put my fingers in the holes in his hands, I will not believe. And so he expresses this pretty radical doubt, but he doesn't stop showing up. He continues to hang with his crew. He doesn't just ditch the whole operation. He's honest about what he doesn't believe, but he's like, all right, he keeps showing up. And 8 days later, things click. And it starts to make sense for him. And so we said, walking away from that, really, if you're doubting, if you're in a season of intense doubt, don't make life-changing decisions. Don't throw it all out the window because you're in a season of struggle. Then last week, we talked about Peter, one of Jesus' followers, and the importance of directing your focus and having disciplined thought. When it comes to doubt, making sure it's not just vague, critical, ambiguous negativity, but actually being disciplined about, all right, what is it here that I'm letting into my mind, right? And what am I choosing to spend time focusing on? Because enough time looking at something that is true can still bring you to a pretty dark place, right? We need to be aware of what we're consuming because that will pretty radically affect our belief, our faith, disciplined focus, directed focus, and disciplined thought, rather. So if you want to dig into any of those, you can check them out online. Today, we're wrapping it up, and here's how we'll conclude the series. Maybe you can relate to this. When I was in like middle school, high school, those years, I started really for the first time, not just taking, my parents' word for everything they said about God and church and religion, but really started like kind of looking at things myself and deciding, okay, do I believe, is this for me? Am I gonna be one of those people that buys into this or one of those people that doesn't buy into it? And at the same time, I also had to decide how I was gonna live my life, right? Now, if you've been in middle school or high school or you're in there right now, you might know, at least if you're like me, right? This is how it worked in my mind, which is not necessarily reality, but there were like some things that I wasn't supposed to do, like the big things, They were almost, to me, they were in a category on their own. And these were the things I couldn't do if I was gonna be one of those church kids, Like things you weren't supposed to do, things you weren't supposed to say, things you weren't supposed to consume, touch, places you weren't supposed to go. It was like those things. And if you're gonna do those things, well then you can't be into the whole church, God, faith. And so I had to decide, am I going to obey God, like follow Jesus, do all the things? Am I willing to do it all, including saying no to those things, or not? And the answer for me, honestly, was that no, I was not willing to say no to those things. I wanted to. At that point in my life, those things meant too much to me. And so I was like, no, I'm not, those things, no, I'm not giving those up. And so the conclusion that I came to was, no, this just isn't for me. If I can't say no to those, if I'm not willing to give those things up, then I'm not gonna be one of those people. Really, the mentality was an all or nothing mentality. Either I'm all into it or I'm all out. Or in other words, though I didn't articulate it like this at the time, what I'd come to believe is if I couldn't follow, like obey it all, then I couldn't follow at all. If I couldn't listen to it all, then I couldn't listen at all. Like I was either totally in or totally out. And so I just decided, no, that's not me. And maybe you're sitting here today and you're in the same boat. Maybe you're not in middle school or high school, but you're looking in at the church like, I'm not totally sure about this. There's some things about this I kind of like, I kind of want to believe. But I have heard from some of those people, or maybe I heard on the news, or the church people, I know that they're like not into that, or they're not into this, and so I'm just never gonna be there, and so I can't be one of them, right? Or I can never really buy into this because I know I'm never gonna be there. And it comes from this all or nothing mentality. If I can't do it all, then I can't do it at all. Or forget like doing. What about even just belief? Like there was a point later on when I got older where I actually started studying on my own and found what I was learning to be really interesting. And I was like, this is good stuff. I was attracted to it. This was where the whole idea of actually, starting a church around that time, this started to kind of blossom. And I wanted all of it to be true. I'd want to believe all of it. And it was great. It was exciting. But then every once in a while, I'd have a conversation, or I'd watch a YouTube video, or I'd hear somebody smart say something that would make me question something in the Bible, something in here. And it could have been like an obscure thing from a story hundreds of years ago. Would somebody be like, that didn't actually happen? Or that's wrong, that couldn't have happened. And it was like, I would literally get a sick feeling in my stomach. And I would just try and suppress it. Like, change the channel. Turn it off. I don't need my mind to be going there and thinking that that's not true. Why? Because intentionally or unintentionally, I had come to believe that if I couldn't believe it all, then I couldn't believe at all. And it was like someone came along to my faith with like a little pin and just popped it. And so I would get scared. And that's where doubt became so dangerous. That's when I was literally afraid of it. Like I'm making decisions now that are gonna affect the rest of my life. And if all of a sudden someone comes along who's smarter than me and makes me feel like some of this stuff isn't true, then it was all a waste. And doubt becomes deadly to what we believe. It's where it becomes so strong. And so to closing this series, I want to show you a passage in the time that we have left that I think just disarms the power, the weight of doubt a little bit. And if you're sitting here today and you're feeling like looking in from the outside, or you can relate to any of those things, or you felt like you've had to pretend to believe something because you were afraid that if you didn't believe all the things, you couldn't believe anything, I think that this is something that can make that feeling a little lighter. So when Jesus was like assembling his crew, he went around and invited people to come follow him. And John actually recorded this for us so we could see how it happened. Now, a few weeks ago, we talked about John the Baptist. This is not that John. This is just another John. We call him regular John, all right? And he's friends with Jesus. He's probably one of Jesus' youngest followers. He's the youngest out of the 12. And he records this. And he tells us what it looked like when these two guys, Philip and Andrew, Philip and Nathaniel, what it looked like when they decided to follow Jesus. Fun fact, this guy Nathaniel, if you've never heard of him, his name is they also call him Bartholomew, which makes sense, right? And if you haven't heard of Bartholomew, it's because no one talks about him. But anyway, we get this little story about him. And so here's Nathaniel, and here's how this unfolds. Philip has already bought into the whole idea of following Jesus. He's like, I'm with this guy. I'm impressed. He's really wowed me. I got to go tell my pal Nathaniel. So Philip finds Nathaniel, and it says this. He found Nathaniel, and he told him, right? He told him. He's like, Nathaniel, we have found the one Moses wrote about in the law and about whom the prophets also wrote. They had a Bible. It wasn't like our Bible. It was shorter. It was only the first part. And in there, they believed, like hundreds of years earlier, someone was coming. There was a promise that someone was coming, this hero, this rescuer, this savior. He was on the way, and everyone's sitting around like, where is he coming from? When is he coming? They're like, this guy is the hope for them. And Philip is like, Nathaniel, we have found this guy. And you know who he is? He's this guy. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. That was his hometown. They didn't use last names back then, so they just identified by association. Jesus of Nazareth, he's the son of Joseph. In case there's another Jesus of Nazareth, this is the guy, okay? Now, this is not a very sexy explanation of this guy coming. They're expecting him to come in triumphantly with, gold and sparkles, and he's coming from Nazareth, which is not all that exciting. And so Nathaniel replies, he's like, Nazareth? Really? Can anything good come from there? Nazareth was like this small, very not exciting place. It would be like him saying, he's Jesus here. He's from Hoboken, It's just not. Hoboken has the Cake Boss, which is kind of exciting. Anyway, it's just not very exciting. And so, what is he expressing here? Doubt. We have found the guy you've been looking for. He's the answer. And Nathaniel's like, I doubt it. I doubt it. And here are the words that Philip gives him. And these are the words I want you to remember. And I think these are the words that we need to use to understand our approach to following Jesus. Philip looks at Nathanael and says, come and see. Just come and see. He went from an explanation Moses wrote about him. He's in the prophets. Like, he could have gone deeper into the explanation. Look, let's go. Let's get, what's on page 97. But instead, he moves from an explanation to an invitation. Just come and see for yourself. Take a step in this direction and look at how things change. What he's talking about here is a process. It's a process of following Jesus. And this is how Jesus attracted people to him. He just invited them. He would literally meet people and say, follow me. Like, literally, just follow me. I'm going this way. You come too. And they would follow behind him. And as they came and saw, things would start to click and make sense. But it was a process, them coming to believe. It was a process one step at a time, one step at a time. Now pause for a second, all right? Now this might seem totally irrelevant, but I'm going somewhere with it. Have you ever wondered what the most common lie is among the human race? Ever wondered? It's a lie that I'm guilty of all the time. At this point in my life, probably hundreds of times. I lie about this so often, I no longer feel bad about it. My conscience has been seared. And before you judge me, you probably have lied about it too. All right? Here's what it looks like. I have read and agree to the terms. Right? And then we see this, and we're like, click, click. I agree. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. You want to get like cream cheese and you got to create an account. To create an account, you have to read and agree to the 9 pages, the terms and conditions. I have agreed to more things than I will ever find out, One day someone's gonna come knock on your door. You're gonna find out that they own your middle name because you downloaded Candy Crush in 2007. But here's the thing, okay? You don't check the box. You don't download the app, right? If you don't check the box, you can't make the username, you can't order the thing, you can't create the account. You got to agree to the terms and conditions or you're not in. It's black or white. You're in or you're out. That's it. So my question for you, when you think about God and the church and Christianity, honestly, does it feel more like a come and see, a process, a step, or I agree? In a lot of church circles, we're handed something and we're like, you want to be in the club? Here, check the box. Do you agree to the terms and conditions? Great. Now you believe all this. Now you're in. Now you've agreed to do it all and believe it all. And that's not the approach that Jesus used. He made room for a process. If you were with us early in the year, we talked about Peter, who became one of the biggest leaders in the church. Like one of the most influential people who literally had ever lived. And Jesus met him one day on a beach. We know the story. We know the details of the story. And Jesus is teaching, he turns around at Peter, he's like, Peter, can I use your boat? I'm gonna need your boat. And Peter was like, all right. And he gets in the boat. He's like, okay. When everything was done, he was like, hey, let's go fishing. And Peter was like, look, we just went fishing already. Normally don't go fishing at this time of the day, but if you say so, we will. And they go out. He takes one step at a time, and from there, things begin to change in the way that Peter understands Jesus. That's when he begins to believe. And years later, Jesus sits down with Peter over dinner, and he says, Peter, one day, I'm gonna need you to die for me. And Peter says, I'll do it. But that whole process started with Jesus saying, Peter, I'm gonna need your boat. if he had started with, hey, Pete, I'm Jesus. One day you're gonna die for me. Peter would have been like, see ya. It's not for me. He met people as they are, meets people as they are, where they are, and invites them to come and see, to take one step at a time. And this is so true when it comes to doing all the things that followers of Jesus are doing. If you're sitting here today and you're like, I kind of get some of this, but there's some things I know the church, like I've heard that there's some things that they don't do or they don't support. And so because I'm not there, I can't be one of them. What I would say, and I think what Jesus would say is just, okay, fine, put that on the back shelf for a minute right now. And just take one step in this direction. Just come and see. So practically, years ago, I worked in a student ministry, a student department, before the church started, years before that. And there was this group of students, they came, they hung out, they had a great time. But there was one student who was like, the crazy one. And he had this relationship that none of the parents liked. And they're like, we got to get him to break up with his girlfriend because they're doing stuff, and then they're too young. And everyone's like, let's send him to church. Lou, you get him to break up with his girlfriend. I was like, oh, good, that'll be my job. And so I was like, just tell him to come. Just tell him to come to the group and we'll hang out, whatever. And what I didn't tell the parents was that I had no intention of addressing the topic of his girlfriend. None. Do you know why? Because he believed nothing about God. He had no idea who Jesus was. And so what am I supposed to do? Say, hey, welcome to church. I'm Lou. This is Jesus. And he wants to take what you love. What has he just learned? Jesus, he taught people. He fed them. He healed them. He led them. And bit by bit, piece by piece, things began to fall into place until they found themselves in a place where they were doing things they would have never dreamed of. But it never starts there. And what I would suggest to you is when we talk about the doing of following Jesus, the obedience, the listening, whatever you want to call it, the pressure, especially if you are new, the pressure to do it all is enough to keep you from doing anything at all. If you're looking at this from afar and you're like, I can't do that, I would say, okay, we'll just put that aside for a second and let's look at the steps that you can take. And at some point, you might find yourself doing something you didn't think you'd ever be willing to do, in a place you never thought you'd actually be. But it starts with a step. It starts with a step in that direction, and we need to learn to make room for the process. If you're someone who's been in the church for a long time and you've got friends or family members that don't believe what you believe, this is just so important that you understand this. You can't just come to them and say, hey, you believe and all of this and do all of this. And if you don't, then you can't be one of us. That's not how Jesus operated. I'm not saying that there's not a point in time where things make sense. I'm not saying that there's not a point in time where you believe. There is, but it's part of a process, of a journey. And we need to learn to make room. In between the all and the nothing, there is a process. A process. And this is true as well for believing. Not just the doing, but the believing. Some of us were told that the Bible is true. And that not only do we have to do it all, but we have to believe it all. And you can go to a lot of churches, and you'll meet a lot of people that say, I believe every word in that is true, every word. And a lot of those people have not read every word that they believe is true. But we've just checked and agreed to the terms and conditions. Fine, I'm in. And what's so dangerous about that is all it takes is one conversation with one person who's got a convincing argument to just the whole operation, to poke one hole in it. Because there's this pressure to believe all of it. And what I would suggest to you is that the pressure to believe it all is enough to keep you from believing at all. At the end of the day, the thing that really matters, when Philip says, come and see, he's saying, come and see who Jesus is. He's not saying, like, come in and let's start at page 1 and get you to believe all the things that have been written before you can believe who Jesus is. He says, no, just come and see. When Paul, who came after Jesus, went out to start churches, he would go to these places that had never heard of the ancient, like, they don't know ancient Jewish history. They don't know Moses, they don't know Joseph, Joshua, Pharaoh, all those stories. And Paul doesn't start there. He says, let me tell you about a guy named Jesus. He said that he was God. They killed him. You heard about that. It happened in Rome. And then he came back. So we're with him. And people bought into that message. And everything, I'm not saying it's not important. I'm not saying that it's true. I'm not saying I don't believe that it's true. I'm just saying it is secondary. Everything is secondary to that. And so if you're sitting here today and you're like, I want to believe. Like, I really, there's some stuff that seems to just make so much sense, but I've heard stories like Jonah. There's a guy, he got swallowed by a whale. 3 days later, he showed up just fine, like nothing happened. I'm not sure I can believe that. I would say, don't let Jonah get in the way of you investigating Jesus, because it was never about Jonah. You don't have to believe all of it to believe any of it, to come and see, to take a step in that direction. And if you believe that you have to believe all of it to believe any of it, your entire faith brings with it the pressure to defend and support every single thing that you read. Every single thing. And all I'm saying is that you don't have to carry that much weight. I'm not saying that it's not true. I'm not saying I don't believe that it's true. I'm saying that's not what it's about. It's about this guy named Jesus. And if he really is who he said he is. And the way we find that out is by stepping in that direction, by choosing to come and see. In other words, when we're talking about doubt, especially if you're new to faith, start with small steps, believing small things. Maybe it's believing things that Jesus said about himself, things that he said that might give him credibility about what he said about himself. Start with small. Don't start with all. It's too much pressure to carry, especially in the beginning. And if you have people that you love, that you want to believe in, you're rooting for them, don't put all that pressure on them either, because Jesus never did that. He gave people invitations and invited them to come, one step at a time. As he taught them, as he fed them, as he healed them, led them, things started to fall into place. Here's how the story ends. So it says, Nathanael, he's like, all right, fine, you want me to come? Fine. He gets up, he starts walking toward Jesus. It says, when Jesus saw Nathanael approaching him, he said of him, here is an Israelite. This is nationality. Here's an Israelite in whom there is no deceit. This guy tells it like it is. Nathanael says, how do you know me? And Jesus replies, I saw you while you were still under the fig tree, before Philip called you. Like back then, when you were just sitting there, and before Philip even walked up to you and told you about me, I knew this was all gonna unfold. And Nathanael has his mind blown. He declares, Rabbi, you are the Son of God. It starts to make sense. He says, you are the King of Israel. Because Jesus said, I saw you under the fig tree. He could have said, I heard what you said about my hometown, but he doesn't, because he's nice. He says, you're the King of Israel. And this is my favorite part. And I think this applies to you no matter where you are in your journey of faith. Jesus said, you believe because I told you I saw you under the fig tree. Like you came and you saw. You took a step and you saw something about me. He says, you will see greater things than that. The best is yet to come. You take a step and you see, well, now you're going to take another step. He's talking again about a process. There's going to be more for you to see. There's going to be more for you to believe. And this was true not just of Nathanael, but of all the followers of Jesus. They followed him for 3 years before things completely made sense to them. But it was because they were willing over and over and over and over again to come and see, to take a step in that direction. That student, he started coming. We would hang out, we had a good time, play basketball together. Eventually started asking me questions about God, about Jesus, start to really wrestle with those things. He was very interested. And we never talked about his girlfriend. And one day after, on a Wednesday night, after one of the messages, he came up to me and he had like tears in his eyes. And I said, what's the matter? And he said, there's like something going on within me. He's like, I don't really understand, but it's starting to make sense. He's like, it feels like it's real. And there that day, like we talked about what it looks like to have a relationship with God, to learn how to trust Jesus. And we talked about how that grows and how you can nurture it. And he bought in 100%. Like totally into it, totally excited about it. And a few weeks later, he came up to me and he said, again, with tears in his eyes, he said, I broke up with my girlfriend. And that was the first time his girlfriend had come up between us. I said, what do you mean? He said there was just something about it that wasn't quite right. I can't explain it. And that was it. And the issue took care of itself. And so all the parents were happy. But if our relationship had started with, hey, I'm Lou, and you need to break up with your girlfriend because that's what God would want you to do, he would have missed out on everything that he learned about Jesus, on what it looks like to have a relationship with God. And he would have walked away, and he would still be with that girl. I'm not saying she was a bad girl, but at that time, it wasn't the right thing for him in his life. But it happened because he was willing to take one step and the next and the next and the next. And before he knew it, he was willing to do something that he would not have been open to weeks earlier. It was because he came and he saw. And from that point, he became one of the leaders. He became a student other students looked to. He helped me move. We became great friends. And it was like looking back at it now, he could see then. It's like you could hear the words of Jesus saying, you will see greater things than these. So my question for you, no matter where you are in your faith, what's the next step for you? You know, maybe there's a big hang up you have. There's something you just can't quite believe. I'm not saying ignore it. You should engage it at the right time, but don't let that stop you from taking the next step. There's a doubt that you have, something that you're not quite willing to do. Fine, put it on the back shelf and take the next step. Continue to ask yourself, who is this Jesus guy and what does it look like to trust him? Take a step in his direction. And if what he says is true, I think it is, then even in just doing that, you'll see. You'll see, and you'll see greater things than that. But it starts with the willingness to come and see.